The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now, on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
Hey, welcome to our program for this week. Good to have you along with us here today. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church, and with us is Reverend Robert Cornegy, the associate pastor of Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle. And also we want to welcome to our program Reverend Bill Clear, the new pastor at Open Door Baptist Church in Morehead City. Welcome, guys. Good to have everybody here.
Great to be here.
Our program is
privileged.
brought to you by Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle at eichapel.org. Preschool still registering or about ready to go?
Still registering. We had our open house this week, yesterday, and so we're cranking up right after. It'll be the Tuesday after, not this coming Tuesday, the next one.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And Bill, we had Bill on with Coastal Daybreak as an interview back not too long ago, and got to know him a little bit. Thought it'd be a great addition to our panel of contestants here here on Faith Matters.
Mm-hmm.
Bill,
why, thank you, Chuck.
I always wanted to be a game show host.
Yes, I can tell.
So, what's your background, Bill? Where are you from originally?
Well, originally I was born outside of Columbia, South Carolina, so I'm kind of a little bit nearby in that, but then went way down to Florida for several years because my father worked for IBM, which we joke stands for I've Been Moved.
Yeah.
And then after that, I came back up to North Carolina for seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And then from there, got married, spent several years in Southwest China, and then came back to the mountains of North Carolina in Boone. And that's where I departed to come here to Morehead City to pastor Open Door Baptist Church.
Your life sounds like a series of culture shocks.
Yes, yeah.
From one thing to another.
Yes, shock therapy.
Yes, how did that transition go from Wake Forest to China?
Well, it was drastic,
Yes.
but I was going there with eyes wide open to the changes. So it was not the culture shock. Actually, I remember that the greater culture shock for me was not going from Wake Forest to the small town in China that I lived in. It was actually going from the small town I lived in to the capital city of our province, and going there was a much bigger shock to the system. To walk through Walmart and see crocodiles in the freezer, and things like that. In
a Walmart,
yes,
wow.
in the Warama.
It's interesting because you guys were sharing. I know before we started, and I was wrapping up some things in my studio, but you were talking about your own experiences because both of you. I mean, you spent a lot of time in Africa.
In Africa, Europe as well, and so that cross culture bit. Now that's a little different. Now the language. Barrier over there, I'm sure, was quite different too. So,
did you pick up the language before you left?
No,
for there?
not at all. No. Not at all. So when I landed in China, my wife and I didn't speak anything, not a word. We lived in a place that literally had more water buffalo on the streets than cars. And so when you live in that environment, you tend to pick up language when your stomach grumbles, you're going to start speaking pretty fast. And so I have told many Chinese people who ask, how did you learn the language so well? I will tell them, well, my stomach was my teacher. So necessity.
That's right.
You said you didn't speak anything. If my wife had landed with me there, we wouldn't be speaking still. So I think that's another story. Let's our first article though. Let's go to China because it plays an important part in some understandings of the world today. Especially this is from the Stream and stream.org. And Hong Kong's wild card, Spirit-Filled Christians, written by Faith McDonald. Some commentators find it remarkable that the Hong Kong protests have had such strong Christian influence. They observe that only 11 to 12% of the population is Christian, yet the protesters have taken Christian worship songs, Sing Hallelujah to the Lord, along with Star Spangled Banner and Do You Hear People Sing, as their movement's theme song. There are many plausible explanations for the Christian influence on the movement, and Christians believe in freedom and dignity, and some litany there of Christian belief, but also that the Christian churches have served as sanctuaries for the protesters. I found that interesting in this article. And so, Bill, let me start with you then. I don't know if Hong Kong was ever on your horizon when you were in China, but is this understanding of Christianity in the Chinese culture and the influence now of mainland China on Hong Kong is really striking, and it's led us to some really uncomfortable places in terms of our diplomacy, but also I think as Christians we want to reach out, we want to do what's right here.
Sure. My oldest son, who's 12 years old now, my son Sam, was born in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. My wife and I lived there for about 3 months during that whole process of things. And we have an adopted daughter as well, Carolina, who came from near Hong Kong. So we've definitely been in the area and around the culture a good bit. And there, of course, are a lot of similarities between the culture of Hong Kong, China, and mainland China. But there's also a vast gulf of difference in the cultures as well. And really at the worldview level, mm-hmm. After being with Britain for so long, it really did color their worldview towards Christianity in a lot of ways that mainland China does not have. And so it creates a lot of misunderstanding between the two.
So would you say that in Hong Kong that is more tolerant of Christianity, even though it's a minority religion?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And they've seen the schools, they've seen the seminaries, they've seen the hospitals, and they've seen the churches reach out and love their neighbors in such a way that it's attractive, that it's winsome. And so it really has provided them with a lot of respect. And you even mentioned from this article the fact that some of them are even going so far as to provide sanctuary for some of these protesters. And really the protests in and of themselves are standing on the foundation of a Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. That's the very reason that they are out in the streets and that they're using their voices in this way.
Robert, your own experience in Africa, where there have been governments and mm-hmm. people who are being hostile, perhaps, to Christian belief and growth of Christianity. Can you relate to what they're going through here?
Yeah, it is fascinating. In cultures, in Africa, it was more of a Islam Christian mm-hmm. issue,
right?
And so
less of a government,
right? Yeah. And so what has happened there, and often, and in China, I guess, sort of the same way, that if in China, if you're a Christian, you really can't get up into the levels of government and industry and all of that, because there's a political part to it as well. So it's that Chinese worldview doesn't allow for this sort of grassroots people movement of faith
or anything.
In Hong Kong, it's different.
Yeah.
In Hong Kong, I understand that there are people like you said, in leadership in lots of different areas that are Christians. They've actually been able to get up into the echelons of government and society and business and all of that. So this is that worldview clash we're seeing now. In China, it's atheism, but in Hong Kong, it has that Judeo-Christian root to it. And so, it's fascinating. And the reason they're waving the American flags and singing Star Spangled Banner is because we have a constitution that codified biblical principles of truth.
That's right.
And so they're identifying with that idea that there are human rights that are God-given, not government-given, and that take precedent over government.
Right.
And that just, to China, that's not good.
Yeah, but let me push back a little bit on something that you've said, and that is that you said in China you don't have the fertile soil for the grassroots uprising for faith. And I would say actually that what you saw in the 1940s with the rise of Mao and Maoism was indeed a faith. And so actually what you were seeing there was that very thing, was a grassroots rising up and revolution. It was a civil war and a revolution in the late 30s and early 40s based very much on faith. And it was a faith of Mao Zedong. Yes,
yeah.
He was a god to the Chinese people.
Now, we understand, in fact, we kind of described it, you described it as an accordion, kind of squeezing and separating before in an earlier interview about Christianity in China. I mean, is there that fertile ground? Is there for an uprising of faith in China? We know that it explodes and has grown and has contracted and grown again, at least in terms of acceptance. So is this Chinese government so authoritarian that it will just never happen there?
Yes. So the Chinese government, being very much a religious system on their own, and placing themselves in the place of God on His throne, they, much like God of the Judeo-Christian world, who will not share His glory with another, nor will they.
Right.
Nor will they.
Yeah.
And so the soil is there. God can certainly do it, and He's done it before, and He can do it again.
That's our prayer. All right, we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Again, we welcome Rev Bill Clear with us here today, and also Robert Cornegie is with us from Chapel by the Sea, and I'm Ben Ball. We'll be back in a moment. And welcome back to our program here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie, the Associate Pastor, Chapel by the Sea, and also our new panelist, Rev Bill Clear, who is the new pastor at Open Door Baptist Church. And let's take a look at an article that came out, unfortunately, a previous panelist here, Dr. Bob, as we call him. Bob Wilson. He was the one who literally wrote the book on this.
Yeah.
And we would love to have him here, but he did send along some helpful information on this as well. This is we'll start with the one from Christian Headlines. A well-known Yale professor rejects Darwinism, says intelligent design is a serious theory. And internationally renowned Yale professors ditched his belief in the theory of Darwinism, arguing that intelligent design should be taken more seriously. Professor David Galunter insisted that the theory of evolution contains a number of holes and flaws, and warned the critics of intelligent design to stop attacking the theory out of a place of anti-religious sentiment. His quote is, Darwin's theory predicts that the new life forms evolve gradually from old ones in a constantly branching, spreading tree of life, the professor wrote in a paper titled Giving Up Darwin. These brave new Cambrian creatures must therefore have Precambrian predecessors, similar but not quite as fancy and sophisticated. They could not have all blown out suddenly like a bunch of geysers.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. But in his article that he also wrote for CNSnews.com, or they published it, he goes into a little bit more of his own background and Robert, you can relate to this, is that he was raised as a Darwinist. I mean, he was raised to think, his old education was that this is settled science.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It wasn't until I became a Christian that I evolved into a creationist.
Clever. All right. But he talks about, and this is where Dr. Bob comes in handy, because he talks about the holes in the theory,
right,
of it, you can't get there from here, basically, is the idea.
Biology there's some hard and fast truths in there. I mean, they would call them facts. They wouldn't call them laws. But I mean, there's some stuff in there that you just can't make these presuppositional jumps that they make, these leaps of faith, as they try to defend their idea of this slow, gradual evolution. That's the whole idea behind the theory, the origin of the species, that great piece of work that was written in 1859 that changed just about everything. That was the stake in the ground for getting rid of God. So and Dr. Baugh's book is really capitalizes on that whole concept, the nullification of God.
Professor Galerna here goes back and relies on some works of others called Darwin's Doubt, for example, and some follow-ups to that as well too. Stephen Meyer is the author of that, and he in his article that he wrote, he talks about how that as far as biblical religion, it forces its way into the discussion, although Meyer didn't invite it, and neither did Darwin. Some have always been bothered by the harm Darwin is said to have done religion. His theory has been thought by some naifs, fundamentalists as well as intellectuals, to shown or allege that the Bible is wrong and Judeo-Christian religion bunk, but this view assumes a childishly permissive reading of Scripture. I like his way of going at this, even though it's not very direct, but he's eventually saying we have to read Scripture in light of science, not read science and really look at science in light of Scripture. That there's a place for both, Bill.
Yes, absolutely. And at one time, science was a discipline under theology. Theology was the queen of the sciences, of course we could go back and talk about many of the great scientists of our history that certainly believed concretely in a created and ordered universe, and that had no problem setting that beside their own scientific views. So I really disagree with the idea of pitting science against religion and these sorts of things, or even the thought that Darwin in some way damaged or did a blow, struck a blow to Christianity. That just to me seems to put a very weak view. I think Dr. Galerna was implying there as well of the Scriptures and of Christianity in general. John Milton once wrote, "Let truth and falsehood grapple. Whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter." Yeah. I just thought that was a great...
Yeah, and this is what, Robert, we find the pushback that comes from the scientific community. Oh, no, you can't go there. And that too many scientists, as Dr. Bob Wilson will tell you, too many have said to him, "No, you're just starting at the wrong place." Yeah,
what has happened, is in our whole education system, it's gotten so specialized that it used to be classical education. You were taught in the philosophies as well as the sciences. I mean, there wasn't this bifurcation of between the philosophical approach to life and the scientific, if you will, approach to life. You actually had those two together. And most of the people that are pushing back against are saying that the only knowledge that can be trusted is scientific, empirical data. They can't even say that, but they do. Mm-hmm. They don't even know the cognitive dissonance in the scientific world when they try to do philosophy. They just don't know what they're doing.
Right.
And so what they're doing, sure, biology is a real area of study. Stick with biology. Stay in the box. But when you try to get out of the box and go into philosophy and you're not trained in it, there's going to be a mess. And that's what we have. We have this huge mess.
Yeah, and nothing's more out of the box than God.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
he's literally not in the box. That's right. So,
and that's where you get the Richard Dawkins speaking so far, a brilliant man, but speaking so far out of his own wheelhouse, and then actually turning around and saying that there's no such thing as the philosophy of science, and you just go, let's just get rid of it then, that I can then speak as an expert far outside of my field.
Yeah, it's fascinating. These guys Dawkins and the others that they say, well, look. just keep repeating to yourself, it looks like
Yes.
design, but it's not design.
That's right.
Because it's so obvious, and this is that whole Romans 1:18 through 32.
Right.
I mean, this is what it says.
Yeah, that we are-
It's plain.
So
It's-
that we are left without excuse.
We just suppress the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes
Yeah.
back to the we would call this the teleological argument, right?
Exactly, right.
So that this idea that we see evidence in the grand design, in the fine tuning of not only our Earth but the entire universe. Everything observable is so fine tuned for existence, for matter to hang tightly the way that it does. The gravitational forces, the constant of the universes of the universe that's so tight. What it does is that it drives these scientists to harebrained ideas that there are an infinite number of universes.
Multiverses.
Yes,
Yes,
the
the
multiverse.
multiverse.
That's the only place that they can go.
Well, of course.
So that they can say, well, that's why ours makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's sad.
Well, I kind of like that one because I was always a fan of Bizarro World and
Yeah,
Superman
exactly.
comics.
The parallel universes. That's
yeah,
right.
I've always thought about those.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in some of these arguments against Darwin's theory, and not really so much against Darwin, but mostly how the theory has been extrapolated. Really, I
Right,
think
exactly.
that's fair to say.
I mean,
Is it-
it's been contorted and twisted into something.
so.
Right.
So
And because Darwin himself even expressed all of his doubts, right? I mean, Darwin's Doubt, isn't right?
is the name of it.
Yeah, is the name of the book.
But
Yeah,
there's
mine's
also, but I think it's interesting how it devolves. The argument often devolves into something that a sports book in Las Vegas would look at and saying the odds here,
Right.
of these things occurring, is astronomical.
Right.
Is actually beyond infinity.
Mathematically impossible.
So yes, if you're going to then describe something within the box of the physical world, yet you can't make it so that it's not mathematically impossible, then you're out of the box.
Right. Exactly.
You've gone
that's,
beyond it.
That's the nice thing about intelligent design, which is actually a theory. That they argue in against the Darwinism.
Which one of these writers is arguing that it's too scholarly, or it's limited only to those who are in the
practitioners,
scholarly field, yes.
right, in the scientific field. Well, it is, but there's some good lay stuff that's out there, and it really is worth the read. It was in going into those things where I started seeing, in my the presuppositions that I had accepted that were unproven.
Right, Robert, and that's really what it comes down to, is that so many of the professional scientists, they come into it presupposing it is impossible that there be a supernatural creator.
Correct.
And so therefore, obviously, if that's where you're starting from, this is where you have to go. You have to go in these directions.
It's inevitable. You're going to get to these places.
They're just not following where the evidence leads.
And communism is kind of based on this. So, it's fascinating just referring back to what's going on in China. This is, when you eliminate the existence of God,
Yes.
and therefore you eliminate the existence of a revelation from this non-existent
Right.
God, then you have nothing. It's got to be government.
You get back to dialectic materialism.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and then you also get back to, unfortunately, as we often see in our society today, a moral relativism. That my truth is my truth,
Yeah.
and there is no truth.
There is no-
that's beyond that.
Yeah.
So
I love that when somebody says there is no absolute truth.
yes.
And you say, is that absolute?
Yes, well, we're not here to put truth above facts, right? That's what a politician has said recently. Yeah. We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back here to Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And our new panelist joins us, Rev Bill Clear from Open Door Baptist Church, along with Robert Cornegay, who's been with us for over a decade now. I think it's been over a decade, haven't it?
It has been.
He says that.
like-
He says that like that's been a
My
long
life.
time. All right, doing Faith Matters on the program. Well, we thank you for joining us here today. And this next article comes from Stream and the Stream and Stream.org. It's titled "VA Lifts Ban on Bibles and Move to Support Religious Freedom." As a kid, Veterans Affairs Secretary Robert Wilkie recalls that he visited a VA hospital at Christmas time. One of my fondest memories growing up, we used to sing Christmas carols at the VA hospital in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Wilkie told the Daily Signal, sitting in a 10th floor office of VA headquarters on Vermont Avenue Northwest, overlooking the White House. Something as simple and decent as that was being stopped, he said. With the support of the president, we just said, enough is enough. And with that, returning, he said, we went and saw there were no Bibles in the chapel at the VA hospital, and that everything had been sanitized of all religious expression. And he says, no, this is not the intent of our founders. This is certainly even not the intent of the Supreme Court rulings here, too. So the allowed literature now may include the Bible, the Quran, or the Talmud, or any other religious text, VA officials notice. Robert, this is good news. I mean, this is something that we all talk about, religious freedom. It's not just for Christians, but this is religious freedom in a government-run institution.
Yeah, the madness. We get so accustomed to the madness that we forget that there really is a reasonableness out there. And to the fact that it got as far as it did in banning Bibles in the chapel, and that the chaplain couldn't walk down the halls of the VA and go up to people and start conversations. He could only talk to people if they requested him to come. I mean, this is beyond madness. This is insanity. And so hopefully, who knows what's going to happen with this, but it's going to be challenged.
Well, there already, of course, the people. I'm trying to remember the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which I think is based in North Carolina. Actually, Freedom from Religion Foundation wrote in a letter to Wilkie objecting to the standards that the VA's actions undermine our Constitution, which intentionally establishes a secular government in order to preserve religious freedom. Well. Wilkie said back that what Justice Neil Gorsuch said in the Maryland Cross case, and that was a case where a cross was allowed on the government property, was absolutely on target. Wilkie said, because you might be offended doesn't give you standing to stop other people from worshiping. For me, this is not only a military issue, it's a religious liberty issue, and that's one that's vitally important to those we serve. And I appreciated, Bill, that he said that in legalese. He doesn't give you standing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to take a look at, that our religious expression was one of the primary foundational bricks of this country.
Right. And not only that, I think it's just intellectually dishonest when people pull in the Constitution and they hold it up as this honored text before this, they've been talking about, well, you can pretty much make the Constitution say whatever you want to, but today I'm going to make it very solid, and
right.
and I'm going to be a traditionalist here. But then they seem to read the First Amendment of the first article, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And they seem to put a period there when there's really a comma.
Exactly.
And it goes on and says, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They really like to kind of clip off that last phrase, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sad. At the same time, I want to push back and say, that phrase that was at the beginning of the article about singing the Christmas carols, something as simple and decent as that. And at the same time, I want to say there's nothing simple and in some cases even decent. It's very offensive, and we should be proud in a sense to point at these Christmas songs, all of those songs that you're thinking of that call Jesus Christ King. There's a reason that those are offensive, and we should be able to point at those and say, you know what, this isn't simple and decent. We're claiming ground. We're claiming enemy ground here, and we can. I think it's big enough. It's it's adult enough. We're all adults here that we can say, hey, you know what? No, we're making real truth claims here. These are not just little ditties that we're singing.
But what about then the truth claims made by other religions and their expression within our institutions?
Well, yeah, and that is the thing that happens when you read the First Amendment.
Right.
It permits that.
Yes, absolutely.
And the last thing Christians want to do, I hope, is not permit
Right.
people to either believe or not believe.
Yes.
I mean, we know that, and this is a volitional decision that we make. This is our will, that this exchange with God, where we come into relationship with God. And so, it's an individual choice.
Right. But what we want to say is that the thought and the truth claims of Christianity stand up in the free marketplace of ideas.
They must.
We don't want to put a fence around that marketplace and say, no, you can't come in here. We want to invite all philosophies, be they philosophies like Taoism or Confucianism, be they religions like Hinduism or Buddhism, and we want to stand them up so that we can show that our God reigns.
Right, exactly right.
But though, that especially within government institutions, and I think increasingly more in society, we say, no, we don't want to get sued. We're going to take it out. This is we've devolved this spine, since we talked about evolution before, we've devolved it into jelly. So we've taken it back to a single organism again. And now we say, well, these people complained, they have lawyers, they're going to sue, we're going to take it out.
Yeah, thank God for the the legal organizations that are assisting individual Christians. I mean, there was just one on this morning about a football coach.
Right.
He's lost his job because he was praying after the game.
Yeah, I know
and
that.
and there has the First Liberty has come alongside an legal organization to help him fight for his constitutional right.
But here it was an administration that said, and based on a Supreme Court ruling, it said, no, we're going to honor the free expression thereof.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good news.
Pointing
all
to
around.
the Constitution. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, again, I mentioned something similar to this just a few minutes ago, but I want to point out that these folks who very well intentioned, who want freedom from religion, I think that they're being dishonest with themselves, that they themselves are setting up a religion. They don't want freedom from all religion. They're just actually saying, no, we're going to cram our religion down your throat.
Right. That's exactly right. Well, that's always been the big debate.
That's the conundrum that we have.
Yeah. The Humanist Manifesto was declared a religious document. Mm-hmm. I mean, legally. I mean, this is it's a non-religion religion.
Mm-hmm.
The first question is, why are you so upset if you really believe that there is nothing there? Right. Why are you fighting so hard against it?
Yes, I mean,
God doesn't exist, and I'm so angry with him.
And I hate him for it.
But we have had, because I think all of us grew up and say, well, we have a trio of ages here. So, but we all grew up with this idea that we tolerated our neighbor who did not believe as we did. In fact, we witnessed to him. And instead, now that neighbor has taken up their own torch and pitchfork and are storming the gates. And there's a different kind of activism among non-believers, among atheism.
Well, it is disturbing to see what was initially. I know we've never been perfect in our union in America, but our standards were always mutually agreed upon to a degree.
Yeah.
We all
as much as
shared
we
some
could.
commonality there, that you did the right thing and you were nice and you did all that. But we've just lost that sense right now, and it really has become a, rather than a collaboration, it's become a competition, and we really need to get it back to, as best we can. It's just a sign of the time, frankly.
I agree in large part. I also think that we need to point the finger back at ourselves and say,
Absolutely.
where did we, the church or Christian individuals, where did we go wrong, or where could we have done better? And I think that we can all think of many examples where the church misused the privilege that we had for so long, shutting down others even,
yes,
and where now that we are in that or phasing into that sort of
minority,
the prophetic minority, you might call it
the remnant, hopefully. But I think on that line, I think we can go back and look at our different generations, and I can look at how I go back in the 70s and 60s and 50s. We all can go back to those times and say, well, if we had just done, for want of a nail, if we had just done one thing a little bit differently, we might all be a little bit different here. But then but we always have that resource that has not changed,
right,
that we can go back to.
Well, it's the robe of righteousness or the cloak of compromise that we need to determine. The church will determine the church's future. Mm-hmm. Do we stand in this robe of righteousness that God has given us, and that our position is this because of Him, or do we try to win souls through compromising with those standards? And it's a big challenge for the church.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and brought to you by Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle. Find out more details at eichapel.org. And today, in our final segment, let's talk about a North Carolina article that made some national news. This is from PJ Media. It says, "Men beware, following the Billy Graham rule could get you fired." It happened to a North Carolina sheriff. That's actually a little bit off. It happened to a North Carolina sheriff deputy, but we won't quibble over that. The article starts out, is by Paula Bollard. It says, a former sheriff's deputy in Lee County, North Carolina, says he was fired from his job for following the so-called Billy Graham rule and asking to be excused from spending a significant amount of time alone with a female trainee. Late last month, Manuel Torres filed a federal lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, Western Division, and claiming that Eastern District of North Carolina, Western Division, I didn't know there was such a thing, but claiming that the firing was a result of religious discrimination. Torres worked for the Lee County Sheriff's Office from 2012 until he was fired in 2017. Now, again, he was asked to train a female trainee, and he followed the Billy Graham rule. To get more details on that and where it comes from, our newest panelist has some experience working with the Billy Graham folks. So, Bill, tell us a little bit more about the Modesto Manifesto.
Sure. This comes from Billy Graham and his team being in Modesto, California. And they came to a decision at some point that they could recognize that they were at a tipping point of the ministry, and it was really going to take off, and they could see that God was blessing it. And they knew straight from the beginning, and really Billy Graham led this, but it came out of discussion with the team, that straight from the beginning, if they did not set some hard and fast parameters for integrity's sake, that there was no way that this was going to last. They knew that it would catch fire, but the question was, is it going to last? Is it going to burn out? Of course, they had seen people around them who had fallen into moral disrepute as well. This is no new thing.
No, it's temptation.
Right.
That's right.
And so right there in a hotel room in Modesto, California, Billy Graham and his team sat around, and they came up with several points to hold them and to guide them, and just to remind them of biblical principles of integrity. Several of them had to do with finances. Several of them had to do with reporting on numbers that were coming to the Billy Graham crusades. They always wanted to downplay even. So a lot of times the numbers that you read on his crusades are actually less than what were probably there, because they wanted to fall well within the accurate numbers. And of course, now probably the most famous one for our day is this, what we're calling the Billy Graham rule. The idea of spending time with a member of the opposite sex, and how that might be viewed by the public, or Billy Graham, of course, had to worry about how it would be viewed by journalists even.
Correct.
So.
Yeah. So
Avoid the appearance of evil.
Right.
That's really the basis of that.
That is the
wasn't it?
basis of it. Yeah, yeah. But this for Billy Graham and his team, this went so far as even when they walked into a hotel room, Billy Graham would make sure that someone else went in before him and unplugged the television.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, the manifesto's manifestation now in 2019, though, has to do almost completely with also what's been called Mike Pence rule lately, is that you're not going to even ride in an elevator alone with a member of the opposite sex. But it's been applied, Robert, it's been applied here, especially about how men treat women.
Well, that's it, isn't it? That was the complaint.
In this particular case.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to that whole worldview issue. Is there a difference between men and women, basically? And the world would say, no, we're the same. And so, you have to treat everybody just like you would treat anybody else. And you can't have those gender, social, rules that tell you that there's some kind of, could be some sort of unfair, biased
Yeah. But, I think in fairness,
exploitation of a situation.
I think in fairness to ideas of equality that we have over time, kind of like a flour being sifted through a sieve, is that we have eliminated a lot of those things that are not necessary for us to get along and to work together and be co-workers in places, etc. But there are some that remain in the sifter that we need to follow, and I appreciate that people like Vice President or the sheriff's deputy, and as Billy Graham was, they stuck to some very hard and fast parameters.
Sure, and I think that one of the things that bothers me, one of the craziest things about this is that it just seems that either the mud is going to be slung that someone is discriminating against women because they're trying to really protect their integrity here, or on the other side of it, if they don't, then sure enough, allocations are going to come, and it's who cares what the facts are? This person has been accused of this impropriety with this other person, and now it's just truth, and so.
We've seen that certainly lately, that these kind of allegations take on their own life.
Well, it even goes deeper. It's into the thought behind this, that a man and a woman together in a somewhat isolated situation, that the man would be having thoughts about the woman that could be offensive to her, that he even have the thought. I mean, this is really what this is kind of that hate speech kind of thing in reverse. This is sort of like lust speech. That your thoughts are being judged in this, and he's saying, "Look, I don't even want to get in the situation of this." I mean, this is admitting that sometimes we have bad thoughts, and that I don't want to get myself in that situation.
That go down that road, or even think about
exactly.
it.
And so it's not only protecting her integrity, it's protecting his integrity.
Right. Now, here in the conflict, though, that we're presented here, and as we're presented now often in 2019, is that we're looking at whether or not it is also a legal matter. Is that conflict between your faith and your scruples, to use more of an old-fashioned word, and the law, and what is equal access. And so Torres makes the argument here, and I think the argument could be made in the case of the reporter that would not, or the candidate who did not let a female reporter ride in his own truck with him on a 12-hour day, and that there are accommodations, and that the law allows for accommodations to be made so that the same end result can be achieved. The person could be trained.
In this case, training.
The training could be accomplished. The story could be followed. there are accommodations that are there. But no, going back to the Gorsuch statement there, just because you're offended doesn't mean you have standing.
Right. Exactly.
I think that at the same time, he's building this case off of a religious freedom case, right? He's saying that his religious liberty is being curtailed here illegally, and that he was singled out because of his religious beliefs. And anytime that you're going to point back to Christianity and you're going to say, well, this is happening, well, then you're going to get back to the Bible, which is exactly what he did. If I understand correctly, that the complaint that's filed here says that he holds the strong and sincere religious belief that the Holy Bible prohibits him as a married man from being alone for extended periods with a female who is not his wife. And that seems like pretty shaky ground to me to be
scripturally.
Standing there.
There's an integrity. That's an interpretation of a
right. It seems to be an issue of wisdom here and integrity, but I'd be very cautious, I think, about pointing straight back to the Bible and say the Bible prohibits this. Even in the wording here, of course, this isn't the legal wording, but there are other relatives that that the Bible would encourage us to be alone with. Of course, my daughter or my mother, and these sorts of things. So you have to be careful with this.
Well, but I think the key phrase though is holds the strong and sincere religious belief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not up to the government. It says whether or not the belief has flaws.
Right.
But it goes back to the free expression thereof. So this to him was the free expression thereof. And now you can make that case, and certainly people can witness to him on that case. But however, this is not something that could not be accommodated elsewhere, which is also his claim, that there was accommodation that could be made.
right.
The trainee could still get trained, and he could even still play a role. It wouldn't just have to be by himself to do that.
Right.
So there's I think this is where the tension between our church and culture again comes to fore, and while we may kind of laugh a little bit at this particular situation, it is something that again maybe we ought to all take more seriously.
Absolutely.
Bill, thank you for joining us here today, Bill. This is we look forward to having you on the program, and Robert, as always, it's great to see you, and happy anniversary too.
Yeah,
wedding
thank
anniversary
you.
too,
Happy
by the
anniversary.
way.
Yeah.
And we'll have more next week on Faith Matters.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. To revisit today's program or to find more episodes, visit thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.